He was never meant to be the one holding her life in his hands. Malik Cross, a black kingpin the city loved to demonize, was just trying to clear his head in the cold silence of a forgotten street. Then he saw her, a white female cop crumpled on the concrete, bleeding out where no ambulance ever comes on time. In a city where black bodies usually get left to die, he now stood over a dying officer the system would move mountains to protect. One choice could expose everything. One choice could end him. Before this story begins, the listener is invited to breathe, to subscribe, and to share in the comments what they would do in his place. By the time midnight crept over the city, Malik Cross had already survived another day of walking a tightrope no one outside his community understood. To the news, he was a headline and a mugshot, waiting to happen. The dangerous black man blamed for every problem in the neighborhood. To the people who actually lived there, he was the one who made sure elders had medicine, kids had warm meals, and families could keep the lights on when paychecks disappeared into unfair bills and quiet discrimination. He had grown up watching patrol cars cruise slowly past his block, not to protect it, but to patrol black skin like it was a crime by itself. He remembered officers laughing while his friends were shoved against walls, remembered how quickly the badge turned cold when his own brother needed help and no one came. The message was clear. In this city, some lives mattered more than others, and his did not make the list. So Malik built a rule that kept him alive and out of a cage. Never get close to the police, not to help, not to talk, not to save. Their world and his would never mix without somebody black paying the price. That night, the weight of rumors and betrayal pressed on his chest. Whispers said someone was feeding information to the cops, the same system that had crushed his people for generations. Needing air, he stepped out alone, leaving noise, money, and power behind. Block after block, the streets grew emptier, streetlights dimmer, the chill sharper against his skin. Somewhere ahead, beyond the last busy corner and the last open store, fate waited under a weak, buzzing light, ready to test the one rule he swore he would never break. A sound broke the stillness, small but sharp enough to slice through Malik's thoughts. It wasn't a shout or a cry, just a broken, wet struggle for air. The kind of sound you hear in hospital hallways or at the edge of a last breath. Malik's body stiffened. Every lesson carved into him by experience told him to ignore it, to keep moving, to mind his own business, the way the world had always minded its own when black people were the ones suffering. But the sound came again, weaker this time. His feet slowed, then turned on their own, carrying him toward the narrow strip of concrete where the streetlight flickered like it was losing a fight with the darkness. That was where he saw her. A woman in a crumpled police uniform lay half on the sidewalk, half in the gutter, as if the city had tried to spit her out and failed. Blood spread beneath her like a shadow that refused to stay in place. Her skin was ghost pale against the stained pavement, her chest rising in shallow, stuttering attempts at survival. The badge on her chest caught the weak light for a second. Monroe, Claire, and then it, too, faded back into the gloom. Malik froze a few steps away, a white female officer bleeding out in his world, on his side of the city, where ambulances showed up late and questions showed up early. In any other story, he knew exactly how this scene would be written. Dangerous black man near dying white cop. Guilt decided before evidence. Justice decided before truth. Every angle worked against him. If someone saw him, if a camera caught even a glimpse, the narrative would write itself without him ever opening his mouth. The system had never needed his words to judge him, only his skin and his record. He forced himself to look closer. Her uniform was torn, not from a street fight, but from a targeted beating. Deep bruises were forming under the blood, knuckles and boots having done their work long before any bullet. The wound in her side was precise, low, and close, the kind of shot delivered by someone standing near enough to hear her gasp. Her holster was empty, but there was no sign of a struggle for the weapon. It hadn't been lost. It had been taken. This was no random assault. This was cleanup. Malik's chest tightened with something unfamiliar, an echo of recognition. He had seen this pattern before, not on cops, but on friends and family left broken in alleys, written off as gang disputes or bad choices. Each case filed away without investigation, each black life reduced to a line on a police report. Now, here was one of them. One of the uniforms that never came fast enough for his people, discarded in the same streets the department pretended to protect. For a moment, he turned away. Leaving would be easy. It would be safe. It would be exactly what the world had done to his own community for generations. Look, hesitate, then walk on. But memory hit him harder than any punch. His mind dragged him back to a different night. A different body on cold ground. His younger sister, shaking on their living room floor while his mother begged dispatch to send help. The officers had arrived late and annoyed, more skeptical than concerned, more ready to search the house than save a life. They had asked about drugs, about who she'd been with, about what she'd done wrong. By the time paramedics finally came, her heartbeat was already slipping away. No one had been left bleeding in a sidewalk gutter that night, but the message had been the same. Some lives were not priorities. Staring at the officer now, Malik realized he was standing on the edge of the same choice the city had made with his sister. Turn away, call it unfortunate, and keep moving. Or step in, risk everything, and break the pattern that had cost him almost everyone he loved. His jaw tightened. The calculation was brutal. If she survived, she might spend the rest of her career trying to dismantle men like him. If she died, and he was tied to the scene, the police would not stop until they buried him, and half his neighborhood with him. Yet beneath the blood and bruises, he saw something else. Not a badge, not a symbol. Just a human being whose own system had turned on her. The same machine that crushed black bodies in plain sight had tried to erase one of its own in the shadows. The air grew heavier, the night quieter, as if waiting for his decision. Malik stepped forward instead of back. The warm slick of her blood soaked into his hands as he shifted her weight. Each second he spent there increased the danger, tightened the noose. But there was no going back now. He lifted her from the pavement, feeling how little time she had left in the limp weight of her body. The city around him stayed indifferent. Windows dark, sirens far away, like it always did when the wrong kind of person was bleeding. Only this time, Malik refused to play his assigned role. Somewhere in the distance, an engine hummed and then faded, leaving the alley in suffocating silence. He adjusted his grip, turned away from the empty street, and headed toward the one place in the city where questions weren't asked and official reports never reached. If she died on that walk, it would be the end of a stranger. If she lived, it would be the beginning of a war neither of them had planned for. Malik burst through the back entrance of the only place that could keep them both alive, a worn-down building that looked abandoned from the outside but pulsed with secret life within. The doctor on duty, a man Malik trusted with silence more than skill, didn't ask questions. He saw the badge, the blood, and the look in Malik's eyes, and began to work. Minutes stretched into hours. Malik stood by the door, soaked in someone else's pain, knowing every second in that room was another chance for the system to find him and finish what it started. When the doctor finally stepped back, Malik saw what he already feared. She was barely holding on. The bullet hadn't come from a random thug. It was police-issued. The bruises, the angle of the shot, it all screamed betrayal. Whoever did this wasn't some stranger from the streets. They were from her world. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, the truth came spilling out between labored breaths. Her name was Detective Claire Monroe, and she had been investigating corruption in her own department. White officers running protection for drug money, fabricating charges against black residents, silencing anyone who asked too many questions. When she found the evidence, her own partner turned on her. Malik's heart pounded as every word stripped away another illusion. The cops who claimed to protect the city were selling it off piece by piece. The same ones who hunted him were the ones profiting from the chaos they blamed on people like him. The city had always called him a criminal, a monster, a stain. But looking at her lying there, broken by the very system that empowered her, Malik saw the line between villain and victim blur until it disappeared. Outside, sirens began to swell in the distance, growing louder, closer. Malik knew they weren't coming to rescue her. They were coming to clean up the mess. He grabbed his phone, calling his second-in-command. His voice was steady, cold. "They're coming for her. And if we don't stop them, they'll erase both of us." As the doctor covered Claire's wound with trembling hands, Malik glanced out the window. Blue lights cutting through the dark. For the first time in years, fear and fury burned together in his chest. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to expose a truth the city had buried for decades. And tonight, Malik Cross was done being silent. By sunrise, the city was burning with whispers. A white detective found alive in a warehouse tied to Malik Cross, and evidence of police corruption spreading like wildfire through every precinct. Within days, headlines called it the Monroe Scandal. But Malik didn't care about the noise. For once, the truth was louder than the lies. Detective Claire Monroe survived, though the force she'd once trusted turned its back on her. Her report, combined with Malik's hidden recordings of backroom payoffs, brought down officers who had been untouchable for years. The very system that painted Malik as a criminal was now choking on its own guilt. For Malik, the cost was everything. His network crumbled, his allies vanished, and his name became the center of a storm that blurred right and wrong. But for the first time in his life, he'd done something that felt right. Saving her didn't change his past, but it shattered the myth that redemption was impossible for men like him. Weeks later, standing on the same street where he'd found her dying, Malik looked at the bloodstain that rain had nearly washed away. It wasn't gone. It had just sunk deeper into the cracks. That's how injustice worked in America. It never disappeared. It just hid, waiting for the next story, the next life, the next name. He thought about his sister, about every black life dismissed as just another statistic. Maybe this was the first time the world was forced to see what people like him had known all along. That corruption wasn't colorblind, but it always bled one way. As the sun rose over a city pretending to heal, Malik whispered, "Maybe saving her was the only way to save myself. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from the system. It comes from those the system tried to destroy."